Hello, everybody. Welcome to Wirelive episode 15. We are here today to talk all things AWS and specifically AWS cost optimization. For those of you thinking, what on earth are those things? Well, you're going to find out a lot more about those topics in the next half an hour. And for those of you that are thinking, yes, finally, I can get a handle on my AWS costs, this is the place for you. We've got a number of amazing guests with us today, including a sort of co-host from the Wirehives team, also called Rob, just to make it really confusing, affectionately referred to as young Rob within our team, which I suppose makes me old Rob, which is a little bit depressing. So yeah, we have Rob Harding, one of our AWS solution architects from the Wirehives team, who leads a number of our more challenging AWS projects and works with customers day in day out to architect their solutions, and cost is definitely one of the components that comes up a lot in his day to day. And we're also joined by two people with names that I could get completely wrong, but I've made sure that I'm going to get them right. So I'm now going to do a terrible job of getting them right. So we're joined by Ellie and Yaya, who are working on their day off, kindly, who are both masters of all things Amazon, and there might be a book that we're going to talk about that they may or may not have been involved with, which we think you should all buy as well. So yeah, let's we'll dive straight in a moment and let the guys say hello as we get started. But just, I think, to set the scene, AWS is obviously one of the big cloud providers that everybody's using these days to run their infrastructure, whether it's something basic like a website all the way through to a complex business system or a back-end application. And the promise of cloud, one of the reasons why it succeeded really and is continuing to dominate, was utility billing and this flexibility of cost. So the idea, the kind of basic premise with most cloud services is that you pay for what you use. And in the olden days, which was only 5 years ago in technology, people used to buy servers or rent servers from companies or buy them themselves, and you had to buy something or rent something, and it was always on. You paid for it for a month or for a year, whether you were using it or not. And so cloud turned up and provided this amazing toolkit, this rich tapestry of different products and services. And I'm sure Ellie can tell us, but AWS, last I checked, had over 100 different components and services now. I think it's probably way more than that now. And each one of those does something really specific in a really clever way. And you can bolt all these tiny little pieces together and in theory pay, in some cases, by the second or by the minute for what you use. Now, that all sounds great, and it is great. But one of the things that happens, and this is very common, is people adopt these systems and then they get their bill at the end of a month, a year into the project, and it's got quite high because all of these tools and systems are amazingly capable. And so you turn them all on, you start using them, and without really thinking too much about what the cost impact might be. And you find yourself in this position where you've got this amazing infrastructure that's doing all this cool stuff, but it starts to get quite expensive. And so there are a number of different tools and techniques that you can use to optimize costs. And we tend to see that come up, 6 to 12 months into a customer's journey with AWS. And so Rob Harding, young Rob, spends his days helping customers with this challenge and stumbled upon this book that the chaps were involved in putting together and found it incredibly useful. So he suggested, well, why don't we get them on and do a Wirelive? So here we all are. That hopefully sets the scene, and I'll pass over to Mr. Harding to introduce himself and kick things off.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much for the invite. It's lovely to be here and to talk all things around AWS. It's one of my loves in life. So yeah, AWS Cloud Solution Architect here at Wirehive. So I deal with a whole range of customers across a multitude of technologies, and of course, cost is one of those subjects which is reoccurring and generally comes up as one of those pressing matters for all our customers. So it's always a challenge to kind of work out what is right for the customer, how much they want to spend, how do we weigh up all these various services to give them best value for money. And I was on LinkedIn one day, looking through my feed, just kind of scrolling through, and then as it so happened, there was someone recommended around a book, Mastering AWS Cost Optimization, this book here, which is kind of like 400 pages of absolute gold, of some really insightful information, which we're going to go and talk around today. I think for me, I've read the book many times, and the most important thing for me here is it's validation. It's validation of how complex this topic is and how many different facets and moving pieces there are to the world of cost. And as I say, like customers have very different needs and wants for cost saving. So yeah, I throw this kind of open to Eli first around kind of what brought you to wanting to write this book and put everything down on paper.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. So actually, this takes us 4 years back when I was with CloudElf in Israel, leading CloudElf business in Israel, dealing with supporting customers, AWS customers, optimize their costs. And I have my dear friend Yair as my colleague. He's back then he was the VP of engineering of Matomi, and ad network company, and he was actually managing millions of dollars of spend on AWS on a daily basis. And when we grouped together to discuss how to optimize costs, we found out that it's much more than a one-time activity of purchasing reserved instances back then. And we thought about it that it's actually a philosophy. It's a process. It's an ongoing activity, and there is a lot to know about it. And it's actually impact how you architect your environments on AWS, and it also impact how you operate them on an ongoing basis. If you just look at it as a one-time activity, yeah, that's not good enough. You actually need to implement best practices, and we sat down together and we thought about the structure. We thought about what are the most important services that we should focus on. And a year after the mastering AWS Cost Optimization, the first release was published.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning here that the KO methodology, which stands for knowledge, architecture, and operations, we introduced this methodology in the book, and it gives our readers a well-tested methodology to apply in their own cloud environments. And for each service they use, you can actually get familiar with its pricing structure, get tips and tricks on how to reduce the cost, and to apply this methodology for the specific server. And by understanding this methodology, you can also apply it for other services that are not covered in the book yet. But since it's a generic methodology, you can use it everywhere, and by the way, in any cloud.
Okay, so we won't speak the competitor's name obviously during this call as AWS lovers, the three of you, but good to know that the methodology does apply to other services. Rob, perhaps you could add a little bit of color on where you found, what. So you talked about validation, like just for our audience, perhaps you could just add a little bit more context on your own relationship with this conversation about cost optimization. So, maybe talk us through like an example of where that comes up typically in your day-to-day. Like, when does cost surface in a customer conversation? Is it at the beginning? Is it a year into a relationship? Like, how does it tend to come up?
Absolutely. So I think when I first talk around the validation, I kind of recommend people to have a look at the AWS networking cost, the various things around data transfer, CloudFlare, CloudFront, Elastic Beanstalk, inter-region versus across AZ costing. It's a minefield. You guys have done a diagram. I think I just put it up here. It just shows the complexity of how difficult this kind of thing is. So that's where kind of the validation comes from, and trying to work this beast out of AWS cost and get better at it. Where it comes up with customers in the conversation, it's generally We talk around the requirements, we talk around what solution they want and some of the technology, and then it's okay, and how much it costs me, and how can I save some money when we're doing greenfield deployments. When it's a new customer, so an existing customer that we've worked with before that has an existing infrastructure within AWS, it's generally one of the earliest conversations we have with our customers. I know we're going to talk a bit further around like the security versus cost aspects a little later on, but yeah, cost is one of those early questions, especially when you're dealing with CXOs or board members. They want to keep costs down, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And so let's move on a little bit. So Ellie, if we come to you, just maybe for those that aren't really that familiar with AWS, could you talk a little bit from your perspective about, just in broad strokes, where you think AWS's capabilities are really exciting, and perhaps you could outline some of the virtues of a cloud model in the first place, right? Because there will be people watching this who still haven't taken that leap, or maybe are considering AWS versus other options.
Yeah. So AWS is a subsidiary of Amazon, the big Amazon, and we are providing on-demand cloud services in a pay-as-you-go model. So actually, customers can leverage over 200 services like compute, databases, storage services, IoT, AI/ML, you name it, via web services or via the AWS console. So in a click of a button, actually you can spin up infrastructure over 25 geographical regions. So actually we are covering the world also, so you can go global in seconds. We have over 1 million customers, and those can be banks like Capital One, those can be technology companies like Netflix, and those can be also small startups that just start their operation, and they don't want to spend too much money on compute capacity that maybe they will use in the future, maybe they will not. I think the main benefit that we offer is the wide range of services that are integrated to one to the other, the ability to go global in seconds, there is no need to plan for capacity because you can scale up and down automatically per demand. And also, I think the wide partner network, for example, like Wirehive, which are supporting our customers in their journey to leverage those services and to benefit from. So we actually we help our customers innovate faster, and we have partners like yourself who are supporting our customers achieving this goal quickly.
That's a great answer. Very compelling set of services as we've outlined, and yeah, coming to you from your perspective, you mentioned the methodology applies to other clouds, but you've really focused on Amazon with your career in technology. Why, from your perspective, do you feel AWS is the right choice for a prospective project or for somebody considering using it in the first place?
Yeah, so definitely AWS is my choice. And I managed large-scale global environments for different companies such as Fiverr, Matomi, and currently at Site VC, all running AWS workloads. The main benefits of using AWS are the wealth of services available for use automatically via web services and globally, as Ellie mentioned, with the global footprint, it allows us to spin environments in many different regions around the globe. And this brings a huge value for the organization that they can scale up and down whenever they want and match the infrastructure to their load, and retiring the need to purchase capacity in advance. And it also speeds up the time to market, and it helps you can never run out of compute resources. And also each team can get their own infrastructure that's required for their own job. And if you know to set your environment in a cost effective way, you can make the most of each dollar you spend on the AWS and become cost efficient.
Absolutely, and I suppose that's ultimately the premise for why we're all here today. So moving on and coming back to you, Rob, let's talk a little bit about this cost optimization topic versus some of the other areas, because when somebody is considering using AWS or is already using it, there are a number of different factors that people consider, and cost is definitely one of the big pillars. And there's a framework that we go through with a lot of our customers and partners called the well-architected review framework, which is an Amazon standard that Wirehive is part. We're entitled to run these audits for our customers. And it's something that Rob spends a lot of time doing. And so cost is an area, the security is another, which comes up a lot. And there's this interesting sort of relationship between cost and security, because in theory, I'll let you outline it, Rob, but let's get into that, right? So talk through your perspective of the different pillars and how cost kind of factors into that.
Yeah, brilliant. From the well-architected review, we have the 5 pillars where we review a workload against. So we have reliability, performance efficiency, operational excellence, cost optimization, and security. And it's interesting to 4 of the pillars versus cost optimization, how you balance that and what's right for a customer. And I have this belief that if you want to be the most secure, you cannot be the most cost optimized, because those things aren't combined. Why do I say that? If we think around security from an application point of view, you may want to put that in a private subnet with a NAT gateway. From a security point of view, that means the application is isolated and does not have public accessibility. Alternatively, if I was less secure, I could put that in a public subnet with direct public accessibility. So where does the cost aspect come into that? Well, if I was using a NAT gateway, my costs would generally be higher because I would need to account for a NAT gateway charge and also the data transfer going through a NAT gateway, where I would have a different set of costs and a smaller set of costs if it was in a public subnet and being accessed directly. So it's kind of, how do we balance these things? How do we look at these pillars, and security especially, versus cost, and what's right for our customers?
And I know that Ellie feels strongly about this one because we talked about it in the setup. So Ellie, this is where you get to tell everybody that security can have no compromise. But what's your perspective on this in the sort of cost versus security debate?
I can say what I tell my customers. So I tell my customers when they onboard to the cloud that they need to have a security person to ensure that first security is the top priority. So there needs to be either an expert within the team or a partner to support them with this activity. And once we ensure that we are secured, then let's deal with cost optimization of the services that are being used. Of course, if you are using a firewall or a NAT gateway or any other AWS service, it has a cost. But the good news is that every service you use has the way to optimize it or to use it cost efficiently to ensure that you are using it, you are being secured, but you do it cost efficiently.
And yeah, is there anything you would add? I mean, I think this. How do you tackle this concept? You've been responsible for running some very large workloads. Security, obviously, you have to get to a minimum standard that is good enough, but then there's always more you can do, and those things tend to have cost implications, in some cases quite big ones. How do you wrestle with that in your own mind and when you're talking with others who use the services?
Yeah, so in my job, I'm responsible for both the security and the cost aspects of our environments. And security is always our top priority, as it's crucial to secure our platform and the customer's data and the interfaces. So of course, there are costs involved for using AWS security services such as GuardDuty, Guardrail, and others. But as always with AWS, there are ways to optimize these costs. Sometimes specific configurations are bad, both security and cost-wise. And a great example is what Rob Harding said about using external interfaces within AWS, EC2 interfaces, that both, on one hand, it's might be a security vulnerability, and on the other hand, it's a cost inefficiency. So yeah, definitely, these areas are the top priority for us.
And coming back to you, Mr. Harding, any other sort of observations from doing these well-architected reviews time and time again, with regards to this cost question? I mean, security obviously is one of the pillars. How do you find cost interacts with the other pillars?
Yeah, so I did some analysis of our all the well-architected reviews that we'd done over a 6-month period to kind of work out what do our customers really want. And it turned out that security and reliability were our kind of most commonly requested. These are our priorities, and cost actually sat in like 3rd place below them. So still quite an important pillar, but as the gentleman rightly say, security first mindset was definitely there. I always get told, I want the most secure, I want the most reliable service on AWS, but I'm not going to write you a blank check for you to do that. So it is always a difficult one to understand how much you can kind of get away with and how much funds you have available to work with some of these services. So there are some smarter things that we've looked to do for some of our customers in terms of turning things off that aren't needed, scaling down overnight, having smaller instance footprints. Right sizing is a big piece of what we do. So take EC2s, RDSs, that's databases, Elasticache, all these kind of services where you have an instance type. When our customers start out, they start with, I think I need this amount of CPU, this amount of RAM, and then how often do you go back and evaluate that? Because it constantly changes, and your application performance today versus 6 months or a year's time could change drastically, whereby a smaller instance footprint is all you need. So yeah, we are constantly battling these other pillars against cost for our customers.
And a question that's coming from the audience, which we can maybe open up to anyone who's had an opinion on it. There's a kind of growing interest in the world in the environmental impact of technology, which I think is great. Personally, it's a cause I'm very, very closely aligned with some of my other ventures. I think that the sort of the other advantage of right sizing and being cost efficient is you're not wasting resource, which has a carbon footprint, right? And I think that it's a really interesting component to this conversation, which is starting to become more relevant. Maybe we'll just get everyone's opinion on this one by one. I mean, why don't we start with you, Ellie, and then we'll come around to the others. Is this something that you're seeing come up more? Is this? Could you talk to this subject a little bit about the kind of the environmental side of cost optimization? What's your perspective on this topic?
Yeah, I think that's something interesting about AWS, that when it's bringing innovation to the market, we do our best to provide our customers the innovation and the better performance, and actually also for lower costs. So actually, if you sometimes if there is a new service coming or a new model coming, usually it costs more. In AWS case, it's the opposite in most cases, but most cases that I'm familiar with. So we are trying to be cost efficient as well as resource efficient. So you will see that, for example, we introduced a new processor recently, the Graviton processor that is based on ARM. So you will see that it's providing you as a customer better performance, but for lower costs. So I believe also behind the scene, it also requires less power and less, resources to enable it.
Yeah. Yeah, and a great example, as technology moves on, in theory, it becomes more effective and more efficient, and hopefully we all benefit from that, as you say.
Yeah.
What about from your perspective? Is this something that you see coming up, or something that you're starting to consider with the workloads that you run?
Yeah, definitely yes. I can say from my experience over the year, I was a consultant for many different high-tech companies, both here in our local environment industry, but also in Europe and the United States. And I can definitely say that over the last few years, I do hear more and more questions about how the environment affects the global environment and the global warming and stuff like that. When we plan, we of course plan for top security and to be cost efficient, and then to be also environmental friendly.
Good stuff. And I always, I do think that's the sort of silent benefit of being cost optimized anyway, as we've talked about.
Right.
And back to you, Mr. Harding, something you've bumped into much or has come up so far with our conversations?
Yeah, I think one of the conversation I had with a customer beginning part of the year, that they actually specifically looked to AWS because they were doing their own research and they're going from on-premise to a cloud provider. And from their research, they specifically looked at AWS because of the environmental impact that they had looked into. So it's definitely something on the forefront of my customers' minds that I speak to.
Good. It's good to hear. And so let's move to the kind of what's next. I think we've sort of, without getting really into the weeds, which we'd love to do with anybody watching one-on-one if they're interested, we're going to spare you all the kind of really deep dive stuff. But I think it's just good to talk about what happens next. What's the future of this topic? Does AWS's platform eventually get to a level of sophistication where it can automatically cost optimize, maybe? Or does machine learning get so capable that it can make such sort of swift and dynamic recommendations that all you have to do is accept them and you'll automatically get there, or not? The promise of technology is that in theory it gets simpler to use over time. I suppose I'll just open it up to the very dangerous game of predictions, and let's see what you all think. Ellie, where's it going? What do you think comes next in this world of cost optimized cloud services?
So I think the good news about it is that AWS is taking this topic very seriously, and you can see the amount of new services and capabilities that AWS introduced with the cost management tool that is getting better and better on a daily basis, with tons of recommendations about how to optimize customers' costs. It can be recommendations for right sizing, like Rob mentioned, recommendation for reserved instances and savings plans recommendations, and many more, setting up budgets, anomaly detection, and so on. So there is a lot that AWS customers can benefit from just looking at the AWS Cost Management console. I also think that the interesting thing I mentioned earlier, the Graviton instances, which are providing up to 40% price performance improvement over the x86, the instances. So if you compare the 6G family instance generation, those are much more cost efficient compared to the fifth generation of instances. And it's quite easy in some cases to migrate from one instance to another. For example, Elastic Cache, Elasticsearch, and many managed services are built in a way that they can leverage these Graviton instances. So you can actually copy your data, spin down one cluster, spin up the Graviton powered one, and you will benefit from any very interesting, very compelling cost advantage.
So it sounds like your prediction is that customers will start to migrate workloads onto these newer, more efficient services, and along with all of the automatic recommendations that are happening, that simple availability of newer, more efficient hardware really under the hood is one of the big drivers that you think will see cost improvement over the coming years. That's great. That's a really, really interesting insight. And yeah, from your perspective, anything else? What's next? What you can go short term, you can go long term, however wonderful and weird you want to be. Like, what's coming next?
Yeah, I believe that the next thing is around accelerating the awareness for cost optimization across the various teams within the organization, including the development teams, to ensure they develop, they write the code that is light in resources perspective, like CPU and memory. And also, I believe we'll see more automated flows implemented to ensure ongoing optimization and governance, like automated cost testing as part of the development cycle and stuff like that.
Very interesting. Yeah, sort of building it into unit testing and thinking about it as part of that DevOps workflow, I think is a really interesting future. And those tools and systems are starting to get better, aren't they? To make that more accessible for development teams generally, which is great to see. And young Rob, what's your perspective?
Yes,
What's
I think
next?
just on the DevOps thing, I think a big shout out to a tool called InfraCost, which is kind of doing this kind of thing as part of your deployment sort of infrastructure. If you haven't looked at it yet, definitely check it out. I think what I'm seeing is for an organization that has some level of maturity on cloud already, if they're doing anything greenfield, start to look at the more containerized or serverless offerings, because there's a huge price change and cost change between a workload that's running serverless or containerized versus the more traditional EC2 aspect. And yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of organizations re-architecting how they build their applications and go more microservice.
Interesting. So I suppose your prediction is that as organizations get into that refresh cycle or building the new and the next thing, taking on that microservices or maybe Lambda or that sort of asynchronous function-based architecture, you think that has a huge cost efficiency and is something that we'll see more of in the future?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I know we've had a couple of customers engage those types of projects over the last 6 months, and they've been very, very effective. So yeah, and I agree with all of the gentlemen here, unsurprisingly, as they're experts in the field. But I think my observation is that if you look at, I think Slack, the tool, makes this the most evident. If you're the admin of a Slack workspace, you get an email about once a month that says, we noticed these 5 or 6 accounts on your Slack instance that you're paying for didn't get used in the last 2 weeks. So we've temporarily disabled them for you and we refunded you this much on your bill. And as a customer, like, that is such an amazing experience and it builds incredible loyalty. And Slack have obviously worked out that in the long term, they will be more successful as a business and make more profit by giving back the fees for those services that people aren't using. And that's so unusual in a recurring revenue business model. So many businesses rely upon underused subscriptions, dead capacity really, which is not in anybody's interest other than the company, and certainly doesn't tick the box from the environmental perspective, as we've talked about, when you have cycles being wasted on useless workloads. I think my hope, and I think it's going in that direction, to Eli's comments about the the improvements in AWS cost manager and those tools and recommendations. Like, it feels to me like that's where we're going. We're going to get to a point where AWS will dynamically send you an email once a month that says, hey admin of this particular account, we spotted that these 15 instances weren't right-sized, so we've just dynamically changed it for you. And if they do need more resource, it'll move them back up again completely transparently. You'll never see the difference, and we've reduced your bill by this much, right? I just feels to me like eventually that's where it's going to end up. Now, that's the very glossed over technical version, because there's always detail to how these things can be done, and then you get into the whole, well, what if I don't want it to do that and I need to be able to disable it, and yeah, of course there's lots of detail, but it's great to see that cloud services are maturing to this point, because I remember right at the beginning when AWS arrived on the market and we were all still putting servers in data centers, and that was kind of, this was always the panacea. This was the promise of what utility build cloud services would ultimately get to one day, was this truly like dynamic, elastic cost center that flexes based on capacity requirements and demand. And the sort of global side of it came up a lot in discussion today about being able to put workloads where your users are. So yeah, I think it's fantastic to see that this stuff is really maturing now, and also that resources like the amazing book you guys have put together are available to make it easy and accessible for people to kind of get their heads around it. And on that note, if anybody watching this or listening later on as a podcast would like a copy of your book, where would they find it? What's the place you would like them to go and buy
it? Yeah, Amazon.com.
What a surprise. Amazon.com.
Go global in seconds. So we published the book on Amazon.com, and everyone around the world can purchase it. And we have readers actually from around the globe. And if there is anyone from South Korea listening, so soon, actually these days, the book is being translated to South Korean, and later this year we'll have a South Korean version of it.
Fantastic. And Rob, I know Rob Hardy's very interested to know, are you going to write a third edition?
So the Korean one is a third release. So we will leverage this to also publish the third release in English.
Fantastic. And so wrapping up, guys, any final thoughts? We'll go around, and just anything you'd like to add, or any material you'd like to recommend to people. Yeah, anything else to add really that we've not covered today?
There's a lot to cover around cost optimization, but I'm very happy to be here with you guys, and I believe that it's a huge subject that we can discuss for hours, and I'm sure our listeners' time is expensive and important, so we'll leave it as it is for now.
Great stuff. And Ellie, anything else to add?
Yeah, again, first, thank you for inviting us, and also for the listeners to listen. I think the good news about all of this topic is that there are good content out there in an unorganized way, and also AWS partners and tools that AWS provide, and the partners to support our customers. If they need help, they can do it with the support of partners. If not, they can do it by themselves. But it's a good point that we are in a good position these days.
Yeah, totally agree. The ecosystem's really matured, hasn't it? And there's so much great resource and help out there now. And at Wirehive, one of those amazing resources that we have available is Mr. Harding, who can now wrap up. Rob, anything else to add?
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, thank you everybody for joining. Really enjoyed this session. I think kind of one of my final bits to say is, for people that are looking to do cost optimization, I think the most success I've found with my customers is when they get granular and look at each individual component specifically, and kind of, how can I maximize the most out of this resource, whether it's right sizing that thing, whether it's its utilization rate, whether it's how much data it's being used. There's many facets to each component. You can look at the high level, the big number, which it could be a bit shocking to start with, but in order to cut away at that number, as they go granular, look at each component, and that's where you'll find the wins to save you cost.
Great insight. There's one for free. If you want another one, do get in touch. Joking aside, thank you so much for listening or watching along live with us today. Thanks to our amazing guests. Thanks to Ellie and Yair for joining us on their weekend, which is our Friday. And please do buy a copy of the book. It's a great read. It's very reasonably priced, and you'll get a lot of value from it if you're running any workload in AWS or helping customers with their workloads as we do. If you'd like to go a bit deeper than that and you'd like any support, we're always happy to help, as I'm sure the guys would be if you reach out to them on LinkedIn. So yeah, thanks again. That was Wirelive episode 15, and see you next time for another exciting episode.